Hey my dear listener, before we start, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Comment down where are you from and what's your time right now. Let's jump into the video. Now beginning. Story 1. A scribe's life in a monastic bureaucracy, circa 1130. You're sitting in a stone-walled room, cold despite the roaring fire in the hearth behind you. The scent is a mixture of wax, musty parchment, and iron-rich ink. The only sounds are the scratch of quills, the murmur of Latin, and the faint chant drifting from the chapel below. It is the year 1130 in Melk Abbey, a Benedictine stronghold along the Danube River in what is now Lower Austria. And you are a scribe, part of the most overlooked but essential bureaucratic system in medieval Central Europe. Though Austria as a state has yet to truly coalesce, its monasteries already run a quieter kind of empire, one of knowledge, record-keeping, and devotion. The monastery at Melk, perched above the river like a stoic observer of time, is not only a spiritual center but a bureaucratic machine. Here, amidst candles and ink pots, documents are copied, lands are inventoried, and legal texts are preserved, actions that will quietly shape dynasties and borders for centuries. Your name is Brother Anselm, and like your fellow scribes, you are bound not by war or royalty but by the slow tyranny of accuracy. You begin your day in silence, as Rule 48 of Saint Benedict demands, eating your morning pottage in quiet before descending into the cloister's heart, the scriptorium. The work is meticulous and never-ending. Charters from noble patrons must be duplicated and sealed. Missals and lectionaries require flawless calligraphy. Land grants must be transcribed with maddening precision, since a single letter could turn a jujurum into two and spark decades of litigation. It's not just about copying, it's about ensuring the continuity of land rights, tax obligations, and ecclesiastical hierarchy. There is a particular burden that lies with the scribe. You are the memory of the monastery, and thus, in many ways, of Austria. Your ink does more than transcribe, it legitimizes. If a document is not recorded here in Melk's thick volumes, bound with wooden covers and calfskin, it might as well not exist. Legal disputes, land holdings, and even royal decrees gain their power not through voice, but through the steady hand of scribes like you. The daily bureaucracy of the monastery is both dull and demanding. The abbot, a stern man named Gundikar, dictates correspondence to regional lords, ensuring that tributes are collected and boundaries are respected. You record these letters, copying each phrase in careful Carolingian minuscule, dipping your quill every few lines. Mistakes are corrected with scraped parchment and careful overmarking, but errors are frowned upon severely. A wasted vellum sheet is not just a mistake, it is an expense, a delay, and a spiritual offense against the order of things. Yet within this gray ocean of repetition lies a deep rhythm. There is order in the bureaucracy. The monks who manage the monastery's estates, known as the cellularii, report daily income and grain yields to be recorded by you. Inventories of cattle, lambs, and stored barley are updated weekly. This is not some distant clerical game, it is the system by which Melk feeds itself through the winter, funds pilgrimages, and keeps its place among the powerful monastic network of the region. You record deaths too. Quietly, without comment, you note when a brother does not rise from his cot. His name, profession, and years of service are entered into the necrology, so that his soul may be remembered on the proper feast days. There is little ceremony to it, just ink and paper. Yet without this act, his name might pass from living memory by the next generation. This is the quiet power of the scribe. Some days you work on larger, more ornate commissions, illuminated copies of psalms or bestiaries intended for wealthy patrons. These allow for moments of creativity. Gold leaf, azure, and crimson pigments make the pages come alive, but even here, the rules are tight. The monastery needs these commissions for revenue, and each must be flawless. A smear or misplaced miniature could reduce months of work to waste. Of course, not every document is so glorious. Most are dull: tithe records, rent logs, inventories of fish caught in monastic ponds. These pages rarely leave the archive, but they are the lifeblood of Melk's economy. They're written in a mixture of Latin and early Middle High German, scribbled in tight margins, bound into ledgers that sit on oaken shelves too high to reach without a ladder. Still, they are sacred in their own way. You sometimes wonder if anyone beyond these walls will ever read the words you write. Will they care that 11 bushels of wheat were traded for 2 barrels of salted fish in the spring of 1128? Will they question the slightly reduced sheep count in the previous winter? Or will these pages molder quietly, forgotten by all but moths and mildew? Your only moments of real variation come from visitors, noblemen bringing land claims, messengers with papal correspondence, or lawyers seeking certified copies of old agreements. These moments interrupt the silence, remind you of the world beyond the cloister, yet they only reinforce your role, to put their world into permanent words. But one day, a document arrives unlike any other. It is from another abbey to the east, bearing an unusual seal. It requests a certified copy of a 70-year-old land grant one supposedly housed at Melk, but no such document is listed in your ledgers. The parchment it references does not match any known chartulary. Yet the land in question lies along the riverbank, land that today is tilled by Melk's own serfs. You are tasked by Abbot Gundikar to find the original if it exists. You comb through ledgers and bound volumes, your candle burning low. Dust rises with each opened binding. You find fragments, mentions of the land, vague references but nothing firm. The days pass. Gundikar grows agitated. If the document cannot be found, or worse, if it never existed, could Melk lose its claim? Could this paperwork, or lack thereof, shift the balance of power between abbeys? You begin to realize something important. Even in the most tedious bureaucracies, power sleeps beneath the surface, waiting only for a signature or the absence of one. And so, under the flickering light, surrounded by shelves older than kings, you keep searching, wondering whether the truth lies in a missing volume, a misfiled charter, or something more deliberate. It is now the third evening of your search. Scriptorium, once a place of rhythmic peace, has taken on a sense of quiet pressure. You, Brother Anselm, are no longer simply maintaining records, you are unraveling them. The silence feels less serene now, tinged with suspicion and anxiety. A single land grant, likely written before your time, has the potential to reorder local authority. The land in question may not seem vast, just a few acres of riverside soil, but it feeds families, earns tithes, and more importantly, signifies control. You sit cross-legged on the floor, parchment scraps spread around you, the stone biting into your knees. On the wooden table, older charters lie open. Their ink has faded to brown, their Latin rougher and more abbreviated than the forms you were trained in. The margins are covered in tiny notes, some illegible. Melk's record-keeping is thorough, but thoroughness does not mean perfection. One manuscript, the Liber Possessionum, the Book of Holdings, should contain the reference you need. It is a heavy volume, its oak and hide binding cracked from decades of use. Inside, it lists lands, rents, and claims. Your finger slides down columns of abbreviations and ornate script. You find references to the region near the riverbank, but not the precise grant in question. Was it simply misplaced, or was it never entered? You raise the possibility with Prior Leontius, the archivist monk who oversees Melk's older holdings. He listens quietly as you explain the problem. It's possible, he says finally, that the original was returned to its sender. Some documents were not meant to be archived permanently, especially if the grant was contested or revoked, or, he leans in, his voice dropping, if it was politically inconvenient. This is the first time the word political has been spoken aloud in your presence. It feels strangely modern, oddly sharp in a room full of scrolls and silence. You return to your desk unsettled. If the land was once claimed by another abbey, and if Melk now tills that land, then something must have changed. But if no record exists of that change, who holds the truth? The script, the memory of those long buried, or the scribes like you who are expected to make the present align with the past. You begin searching an older series of bound charters known as the Rochely Temporum. These rolls contain fragments, partial transcriptions, lists of signatories, occasional seals pressed into hardened wax. Here, you find something, a reference to a land exchange between Abbot Rupert of Melk and the Abbot of Satanstedt, dating to the year 1061. A marginal note scrawled in a different hand mentions a dispute over boundaries, resolved without formal annal. This might be the thread. You notify Gundikar, who orders a full investigation. A letter is dispatched to Satanstedt, requesting clarification. In the meantime, you are told to prepare a formal report, a notarized, sealed summary of all mentions of the disputed land across Melk's archives. You work late into the evening, organizing excerpts, transcribing fragments, carefully noting the shift in terminology over the decades. In 1078, the area was referred to as terra inculta, uncultivated land. By 1102, it is listed as Campus Communis common field. Only in a 1119 tithe record does it first appear as Fundus Monachorum monks' property. The evolution is subtle but telling. No grant, no explicit title transfer, just a quiet assumption, codified by record keeping. It becomes clear to you, Melk never received a formal deed. Instead, through repeated record entries, the abbey became the owner. Bureaucracy made reality. Repetition became legitimacy. This is how authority is built, not with armies or edicts, but with ledgers. Gundikar is uneasy. They may contest our claim, he mutters, but without their original grant it becomes our word against theirs, and we have pages. Still, the abbot is cautious. He orders a second scribe, Brother Ottmar, to begin preparing counterarguments in case Satanstedt presents a document of their own. The scribes now work in shifts, poring over Melk's holdings, seeking patterns, weaknesses, or contradictions. The scriptorium is alive with quiet urgency. As this unfolds, you begin to realize the layers beneath your task. This is not merely a clerical exercise. You are reconstructing the past in a way that will shape the present. Melk's economic future, its standing among the abbeys, perhaps even its safety, all hinge on these pages. The Bishop of Passau, always wary of monastic power, might use this dispute as an excuse to intervene. And if imperial authorities in Regensburg catch wind of land disputes between abbeys, it could attract the attention of secular lords, none of whom welcome unchecked monastic holdings. In the evenings, you join the other monks for Compline prayers, but your mind lingers in the archives. You think about the monks before you, Brother Gerald, who transcribed the Book of Holdings in 1101, now long dead. Did he intentionally omit the deed, or was he simply unaware of its existence? And what of the scribes in Satanstedt? Are they now engaged in the same flurry of research, preparing their own version of the truth? One night after matins, you are summoned by Gundikar again. A messenger has arrived. The rival abbey, Satanstedt, cannot produce the original grant. Their reply is careful, phrased in vague legal terms. They cite historical tradition and spiritual stewardship, but no physical proof. Melk, with your careful timeline and excerpts, now has the stronger claim, not by force but by presence. Your documents will be copied and sealed, prepared for potential inspection by the diocese. You feel a strange mix of triumph and fatigue. You haven't won a battle. You haven't written a poem. You haven't even uncovered the truth in any definitive way. But you have created something resembling stability, legitimacy through ink, a bureaucracy that remembers what history forgets. Still, one detail lingers. In your search, you came across a loose fragment tucked behind the cover of an unused ledger. On it, a faded note reads, "Let no one speak of the gift returned. Let the land be held but not recorded. It is safer unwritten." There is no seal, no signature, no date, but the handwriting closely resembles that of Brother Gerald. You never mention this fragment to Gundikar. You copy it into your private notebook and hide the original deep among the psalters. Perhaps the truth is too complicated, Or perhaps you understand now that even scribes must sometimes choose what to remember. And so you return to your desk, quill in hand, to finish your report. But a question lingers. If enough people believe the documents, does the land truly belong to Melk? Or have you, in your quiet diligence, helped rewrite the past itself? A month has passed. The dispute with Satanstedt has quieted, slipping back into the fog of ecclesiastical correspondence and postponed audits. Melk's position has solidified not with any grand proclamation, but through your careful construction of a narrative wrapped in ink and vellum. The documents you compiled now rest in the archive's secured chest, sealed with Abbot Gundikar's ring and blessed by the prior. A copy has even been sent to the diocesan registry in Passau, where it will join countless other scrolls in stone-walled rooms that few will ever enter. The abbey's routine has resumed its usual rhythm. Psalms echo through the halls, livestock is tallied, wine is fermented and stored in deep cellars. To the other monks, the matter is settled. Yet to you, Brother Anselm, it still stirs something deeper, something that clings to the margins of your waking thoughts. You have not shown the hidden fragment to anyone. It remains tucked within your private collection of scribal exercises, among test calligraphy sheets and half-finished glossaries. You look at it from time to time, the anonymous note warning of a land grant, returned, never to be recorded. The implications remain uncertain. Was the grant revoked? Was there a verbal agreement to surrender the land, undocumented to avoid conflict? Or was it a strategic silence, a void in the record to be filled by future generations with assumptions? What you know, now more than ever, is that bureaucracy is not merely a reflection of reality. It is a participant in its creation. Melk's claims were not strengthened by military action, nor ecclesiastical favor, nor miracle. They were fortified by your hand, your careful documentation, your weaving together of disconnected references and marginalia into something coherent, something persuasive. You begin to see how much power lives in the archives. Consider the small room where Brother Ottmar inventories wine yields. His numbers inform the monastery's trading schedule and determine whether extra barrels are to be sold or preserved. A misrecorded figure could affect the abbey's winter supplies. Or the ledgers maintained by Brother Wolfgang in the granary, which include not only stores of wheat but distributions to the surrounding villages during times of lean harvest. His digits, scratched in chalk before being copied to parchment, shape relationships with entire communities. Then there is the necrologum, updated each week by the youngest among you. It decides when prayers are said, which souls are remembered, and which gradually slip from memory. Without the record, there is no commemoration. Without commemoration, no legacy. And what of your own growing collection of copied legal texts? Over time, your careful replication of ecclesiastical decrees, monastic agreements, and imperial mandates becomes a kind of mosaic. When gathered together, these documents do not merely report history, they begin to define it. You do not consider yourself powerful. You are not a nobleman. You will never inherit land. You take no part in wars or treaties. Your vows of obedience and poverty ensure that your name will be known only to the record, not the world. And yet, what you write becomes the world's foundation. Even your mistakes, you've come to see, have weight. A misstated charter might invalidate a claim. A repeated transcription error could create new customs. A misfiled scroll might disappear for decades, creating silence where once there was certainty. In some ways, your quill is mightier than the abbot's staff or the bishop's crozier, not because you command, but because you confirm. Late one evening, you're asked to prepare a new charter for a nearby village. The villagers are requesting confirmation of their rights to gather firewood in the monastery's forest rights that have never been formally granted, but have existed by local custom for generations. Gundikar instructs you to put it in writing. And so you do. You write the charter in the usual form, an invocation of divine authority, a historical preamble, the formal grant, and the signatures. You add the customary phrase, "As it has been, so shall it be." By doing so, you don't merely describe an agreement. You codify a tradition. You give it permanence. A generation from now, the villagers will hold this parchment as proof of their rights. If Melk attempts to revoke the privilege, they will point to your ink and demand justice. What was once informal will become unchallengeable because of you. In this, you begin to understand the true function of the scribe, not just to preserve, but to give form to the amorphous past and uncertain present. The dull, repetitive details you've written, the sheep counts, the grain trades, the lists of novices, create a scaffold upon which the abbey's reality is built. Your reflections are interrupted one day by Prior Leontius, who brings news. A visitor has come from Kremsmünster Abbey, asking for training in Melk's record-keeping practices. It seems Melk's administrative precision has become renowned. Gundikar has asked you to oversee the instruction. The thought makes you pause. You had assumed your work would always remain solitary, buried in parchment and silence. But now, others seek to learn what you've built. Your habits, your meticulous notation, your quiet shaping of truth, they are becoming a model. And so, for the first time in your monastic life, you teach. You instruct the novice from Kremsmünster on ink preparation, quill sharpening, and the difference between documentary and narrative script. But more importantly, you explain the responsibility of the scribe to document not just events, but to weigh their place in the continuity of the monastery. One evening, as your student copies from an old rental ledger, he asks, "Brother Anselm, how do we know what's true?" You do not answer immediately. You think of the hidden note, of the vanished grant, of the countless assumptions embedded in your work. Finally, you say, "We know what is written, and we write what is believed to be true. It is our burden not just to record, but to be cautious in what we confirm." He nods, perhaps without full understanding, but continues writing. As the years pass, you continue your work. Some days are still filled with tedium, recording fish harvests, certifying livestock births, transcribing edicts from bishops who will never visit Melk. Other days feel heavier, as you're called to resolve contradictions, reconstruct missing ledgers, or explain ambiguities that span generations. You grow older, your fingers stiffen, your eyes tire more easily, but your work continues, page by page, forming a kind of quiet monument. And one day, when your name is entered into the necrologium by a younger scribe, your handwriting will remain in the archives. Your work, unread by most, will be used to determine who owns what, who owes whom, and what shall be remembered. You will become part of the bureaucracy you once quietly served, a voice without breath, living on in script. And as future scribes pore over your careful calligraphy, they may ask, did Brother Anselm write the truth of the past, or simply shape the future as best he could, one line at a time? Story 2. Stamp seal, repeat the rise of the Habsburg office clerks. You are now in the 14th century. The air is thicker, the architecture less Romanesque, more Gothic. Stone gives way to wood-framed corridors, and the flame of imperial ambition burns brighter than the candlelight illuminating stacks of parchment. The scene is Vienna, not yet the cultural capital it would become, but already pulsing with quiet purpose. At the heart of it all sits a table. Upon that table, quills, seals, wax, ribbon, and dozens of folded documents, some bound, others awaiting signatures. Around it sit men not of nobility, not of the cloth, but of ink. They are the clerks of the expanding Habsburg bureaucracy, and they are the forgotten architects of a sprawling and eventually unwieldy empire. You're one of them now. Your name is Matthias. You are the son of a miller, barely literate 5 years ago, now charged with organizing correspondence for Duke Rudolf IV. Rudolf, the founder, they're beginning to call him. He's a man with grand visions, Gothic cathedrals, city walls, and most importantly, legitimacy. Your job is to make that legitimacy real through stamps, seals, and a relentless stream of documentation. This is the beginning of something bigger than yourself, the rise of a modern state administration, born in the corridors and counting rooms of the Habsburg court. What people forget is that empires are not only forged on battlefields, they are assembled in writing. The messy work of organizing taxes, managing feudal obligations, issuing decrees, and recording privileges, all of it falls to people like you. You do not wear armor. You do not command armies, but you ensure the stability of what they conquer. The desk you work from is shared with two others. A shared inkwell sits at the center. You take turns dipping. One man manages land grants. Another, the coinage and trade permissions. You are responsible for correspondence, including internal directives from the ducal office. You write in Latin, occasionally in early New High German when addressing local lords or merchants too provincial to parse ecclesiastical script. Most of your time is spent drafting near-identical letters. To the respected Burgrave of Linz, greetings in the Lord. In accordance with the will of his grace, let it be known that the toll on salt barrels shall be adjusted thus. Every letter must be copied at least 3 times, one for the sender's record, one for the recipient, and one to be bound into the archive ledger. And all must be sealed, not just with wax but with the correct type of seal, leaden for ecclesiastical matters, red wax for royal business, black for death notices. This is the kind of detail that, if forgotten, can delay a marriage treaty or spark an insult. What begins to dawn on you is that the seal is often more important than the message. One day, you are ordered to prepare a Privilegienbuch, a book of privileges, which will contain all the tax exemptions, land rights, and feudal liberties granted to various cities, nobles, and religious orders under the Habsburgs. It will serve as a weapon of legitimacy. To fill it, you must gather documents going back nearly a century. Some are copied from monasteries. Others are transcribed from faded scrolls in the city chancellery. A few are based on memory, which in practice means reconstructing intent from notes, rumors, or verbal testimony. Here's the strange thing: no one questions the process. If you can write it well enough, if you can match the appropriate phrasing, the traditional formulae, and attach a believable seal, the privilege is considered valid. What once was mere favor becomes law. What once was law can be rescinded through careful omission. This is not fraud, it's administration. You begin to see what Duke Rudolph sees. The written word has a weight that surpasses even the sword. A clever clerk can elevate a fishing village to city status, or quietly revoke a rival's rights with a single stroke of the quill. Borders move not only by conquest but by charter. A perfect example is the case of Enns, a town claiming rights to collect tolls on Danube traders. Their privileges were supposedly granted by Ottokar II, the Bohemian king deposed by the Habsburgs, but Ottokar's fall created ambiguity. Were his charters still valid under the new regime? Rudolph's answer was diplomatic. He asked you to draft a reaffirmation of Enns' privileges, now under Habsburg authority. Same rights, different master. With one stamp, a potential rebellion became loyal trade revenue. This is the bureaucrat's battlefield, loyalty managed with ink, not iron. Over time, the office grows. What was once a single table in a crowded room becomes a suite of clerical spaces known as the Hofkanzlei, the court chancellery. Here, notaries and scribes like you begin to specialize. Some draft laws. Others maintain registers of noble lineages. One is responsible solely for arranging marriages between cousins 3 times removed, ensuring no papal intervention for consanguinity. There are rules now, a style guide even. Formal address must match rank, margins must be uniform, the spacing between seals must conform to protocol. These may sound trivial, but they are the scaffolding on which the Habsburgs hang their power. Inconsistency breeds suspicion. Precision breeds trust, or at least obedience. You also begin to manage translation. As the Habsburg domains grow into Carinthia, Styria, Tyrol, you find yourself dealing with various dialects, sometimes even documents in Hungarian or Czech. You're not fluent, but you have a guidebook, a tattered reference compiled from traveling clerics and merchant glossaries. Mistranslation isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. A poorly translated title could offend a nobleman. A confused clause in a tax edict could spark revolt. So everything must be precise. But precision takes time. And time is something no court ever has enough of. Which leads you to your greatest challenge yet, backlog. By 1370, so many decrees and requests have piled up that a new position is created, Erkendenbereiniger, or charter cleaner. His job is to go through old documents and determine what still applies. You are assigned to assist him. Together, you sift through hundreds of scrolls. Some are crumbling, others are duplicates. A few contradict each other entirely. The question arises, which truths survive? You decide based on context, usefulness, and politics. A bishop's tithe exemption from 1315, if inconvenient today, is quietly omitted. A city's outdated minting rights are grandfathered with modifications. It's all legal because it's all being written now. You feel it again. The power of bureaucracy not to record the past, but to curate it. Eventually, you receive an unexpected promotion. You're named Kanzlerschreiber, a senior clerk entrusted with issuing new legal forms that will standardize future Habsburg edicts. You're to design templates with blank spaces for names, titles, and regions documents that can be rapidly adapted for multiple recipients. They call it Formularschreiben. It may seem minor, but this innovation changes everything. Now, the Chancellery can produce hundreds of decrees in a week. Standard forms mean no more rewriting each order from scratch. A single model can support a whole policy. It's the beginning of bureaucratic mass production. You have made governance scalable. But as the seal presses into the wax of the 1000th decree, you can't help but wonder. What remains of the truth when it becomes a template? Now seated near the heart of the Hofkanzlei, you wear a robe of modest wool instead of homespun linen. Your fingers are permanently stained with ink, your nails tinged with wax. Your name Matthias is known among the scribes, if not among the aristocracy. But you don't mind. It is not your name that appears on the documents. It is your hand. And in this office, that matters more. Vienna has grown. It bustles with the movement of carts and pilgrims. Trade has swelled under ducal supervision. Merchants bring ledgers bound in pigskin. Foreign dignitaries send messengers with sealed pouches. And above it all, behind the facades of stone, the Habsburg administration expands. Your desk now includes something new, a Schreibkalender, a writing calendar. It lists not holy days, but when certain decrees must be issued, when tax receipts are due, when nobility expect confirmations of privilege. The paper calendar is a sign of change. Where once administration responded to events, it now anticipates them. Bureaucracy is becoming proactive. You begin to notice a shift in power not between dukes and kings, but between the scribes themselves. There is Hermann, who writes with speed but often forgets marginal notes, and Ulrich, who triple-checks every line but takes days to complete a single draft. You're somewhere in between, which makes you increasingly useful to the Kanzler himself, the court chancellor, a man named Johann von Liechtenstein, known for his relentless push to formalize every aspect of court governance. He is the one who insists on the creation of a Reichsregister, an empire-wide registry of landholding. It will be the first time the Habsburg lands are systematically catalogued, and he wants you to help draft the survey templates. You don't ride out into the field, that task falls to Kundschafter or local informants, but your job is no less critical. You write the form that defines the categories: arable land, fallow land, vineyards, mills, churches, serfs. Each category is assigned a code. Every manor, every estate must now fit within this classification. This is more than record keeping. It is the creation of a shared vocabulary, a way to understand disparate regions under one administrative logic. The bureaucracy is no longer just reactive. It is shaping the very concept of territory. Weeks turn into months. As the registry comes together, your office receives bundles of returned forms. Some are pristine, others are covered in mud. Some contain sketches, others bear marginal notes in dialects so thick you need translators. Still, you log them, copy the essentials into the central registry, and file the originals into a growing archive that now spans multiple rooms. One day you realize, this is no longer just a ducal court. It is a proto-government. Your ink now defines obligations: who owes taxes, who holds which lands, who must send troops in time of war. And it does so impersonally. No one need visit Vienna in person. No vassal need plead his case before the Duke. A sealed letter, properly formatted and filed, carries authority of its own. The seal is still sacrosanct. Now made with an iron press, it is faster to apply than the hand-carved ones of your youth. A junior clerk now handles sealing full-time. You remember when seals were made by hand over a flame. Now, they're stamped in batches. And what of your old task, translation? It has become an entire division. As Habsburg holdings expand to include Slavic regions, translation has become essential. Treaties must be issued in multiple tongues. Tax decrees must be intelligible to Hungarian villages and Alpine shepherds alike. The result is the slow rise of administrative multilingualism, an empire spoken in Latin, written in German, translated into Czech, Croatian, Hungarian, and more. But consistency is hard. You sit one morning reviewing a translated tithe demand. In the original German, the tax applies to each barrel of grain. In the Hungarian version, the word used kerberal means a volume slightly larger than a barrel. The misalignment could lead to thousands of barrels in disputed tax. You correct it, annotate the margins, and send it back. This, you realize, is the real work of empire, preventing confusion. It's not glamorous, it doesn't stir poets, but it is essential. More forms emerge. Huldigungsschreiben, oaths of loyalty in standardized format. Eritsgenehmigungen, marriage permissions between nobles. Grenzbeschreibungen, border descriptions copied from local surveys. Some are copied directly into the imperial registry. Others are notarized and stored. You now train apprentices. They ask you questions you once asked. Do we preserve every draft? What happens if a seal breaks? How do we know a document is real? You teach them about scribal markers, tiny notches in the margin that denote authenticity, about cross-referencing titles and known vassals, about the importance of leaving space in the margins for later additions. You show them how to bind pages with thread, how to use wax in winter without cracking, how to index by region and by topic. You even create an internal index, an experimental volume listing documents by keyword. It's slow to build, but soon proves invaluable. Clerks no longer have to read hundreds of documents to find one reference. They look it up. You call it the Stichwortbuch, the keyword book. And in doing so, you realize something extraordinary. You are no longer just serving a system, you are shaping it. At a time when most rulers struggle to remember which lands they even own, the Habsburgs, through your ink-stained hands, are building a paper empire. One that can outlive battles. One that can grow not by conquest, but by charter. You attend a court meeting once, by invitation of the Chancellor. Nobles bicker about inheritance. A bishop demands recognition of land rights. The Duke listens. Then quietly the Chancellor presents documents, written, sealed, dated. They settle the argument, not because the documents are divine, but because everyone agrees they are credible. And in that moment, you see what centuries will later confirm. The survival of the Habsburgs lies not just in their armies or marriages, but in their ability to write themselves into every crevice of power. But then, quietly, the Chancellor hands you a parchment. It's a request from a lesser noble to confirm privileges supposedly granted under Friedrich the Fair. The original charter is lost, but the family insists it once existed. He says simply, "Draft something appropriate." You hesitate. This is no longer about facts. This is about continuity, about believability, about keeping the machinery of status intact. You open your ink pot, steady your quill, and begin writing. But the thought lingers. What happens when truth becomes indistinguishable from tradition, when every seal confirms not what was, but what is needed to be? The decades pass. The ink on your earliest documents has begun to fade to sepia. Some have cracked in the folds, others are brittle from damp, but they are still intact. They are still referred to. You Matthias are no longer just a clerk. You are the head of a section in the Hofkinsley, surrounded by junior scribes whose names blur together, all carrying the same calloused fingers and faint stoop of those who live by the desk. You now rarely touch the ink yourself. Your role has shifted to one of review, oversight, and, increasingly, interpretation. Because the bureaucracy you helped build has grown so large, so recursive, that it now refers to itself as often as to the world outside. At first, this feels like progress. You see the smooth efficiency with which correspondence moves across the empire, from Tyrol to Carinthia, from Moravia to Vienna. You see policies deployed not by force but by form. A new tax regulation is copied in quintuple, one for the provincial office, one for the noble, one for the merchant's guild, one for the archive, and one always for the copy room. With each stamped decree, the empire becomes slightly more organized. But it also becomes more fragile. The paper binds are not iron. The legitimacy rests on records, and the records, so you increasingly realize, are only as good as the assumptions beneath them. You see this most clearly during the border disputes of 1387. Two minor lords, one Swabian, one Styrian, submit nearly identical claims to a stretch of woodland used for timber and hunting. Each brings a charter, each bears a seal, each is copied into official records, and yet they contradict. Both are authentic. Both cite different interpretations of a vague decree issued decades prior under Duke Albert II. You are tasked with resolving the issue. You spend weeks in the archives, combing through registers, confirming seal styles, matching handwriting. You even send a messenger to a local monastery, seeking a corroborating note in their annals. Nothing helps. No external reference clarifies the timeline, and so the choice becomes political. Which lord is more important to Vienna? Which one paid their dues last year? Which one is less likely to appeal to the emperor? In the end, the case is decided not by truth, but by document stability. You rule in favor of the lord whose charter contains more consistent margin annotations, a petty distinction, but enough to avoid challenge. It unsettles you. You begin to wonder how many other decisions rest on such fragile distinctions. How often has the empire been built not on what was true, but what was easiest to verify? This becomes clearer still when your office begins preparing for the Habsburg family inheritance crisis in the early 1390s. Duke Albert III's death, without issue, raises the thorny matter of dividing lands among surviving branches of the family. Suddenly, everything becomes about documentation. Wills, codicils, succession treaties, dowry records, each is dragged from storage and reinterpreted. You are asked to review the intent of a treaty drafted in 1358. You were still a junior scribe then, and you remember it well. You also remember the context. It didn't include private negotiations, unrecorded conditions, oral concessions. All of that is lost. Only the text remains. And so you polish it. You reframe a clause. You redact a passage now considered problematic. You clarify what was meant so that the chancellery can maintain order. This is not deception. It is administration. This is how stability is preserved. You realize with slow resignation that paper has become sovereign. There is a copy of a charter on your desk, written by your own hand nearly 40 years ago. It's bound in wax thread and bears your youthful signature, mark an extra flourish on the M of Matthias. It has been cited 3 times this year alone to confirm tax exemptions for a family you barely remember. You were there when that exemption was granted. You also remember it was only meant to last one harvest cycle. But that part was never written down. And so the exemption persists, generation after generation, because no one questions the document, because no one can. You look around your archive, shelves upon shelves, ledgers stacked, scrolls rolled in cubbies, newer forms printed on rag paper instead of parchment. The air smells of mildew, ink, and wax. Somewhere in here is a record of nearly every noble house in Austria, every tax levied, every tithe promised, every marriage allowed. It is a kingdom in itself. And yet for all its power, it is fragile. One fire could destroy decades of order. One error could grant illegitimate land. One ambitious clerk like yourself could shape an entire narrative with a single quill stroke. You think often of the saying you once heard whispered among junior scribes. What is sealed is real. And in that phrase lies both the promise and peril of the system you've helped create. You retire from the Hofkinsley with honors, given a modest pension and a small vineyard as thanks. You leave your replacement a capable clerk named Lucas with shelves of well-indexed ledgers and a stern warning. Do not forget, you say, that the moment you stop questioning the page is the moment you become its servant. But you know he will forget. They always do. The system demands efficiency, not memory. Years later, long after your death, a future clerk will quote your handwriting in a land dispute you never imagined. Your signature will be considered proof. Your notes will be referenced by scholars, judges, perhaps even monarchs. None of them will know that your margin note, to be confirmed later, was left unresolved. And in that margin, as in so many others, a nation's future quietly turned. So as you sit by the window of your quiet retirement, the sun warming the parchment of your final copied psalter, you reflect on your life not with triumph, but with weary awe. Because in your quiet service to stamps and seals, you saw something few ever do. The true rulers of empire were not kings or generals, but the clerks who made their words last forever. Story 3. The census that counted too much Austria's first population registers. It is the year 1754. The air of enlightenment is beginning to seep into Europe's wood-paneled offices and candlelit salons, but in Austria, progress takes a more practical form: paper. Not the kind that inspires poetry or philosophy, but the kind that counts people, measures land, and weighs obligations in taxes and blood. You are a district scribe in the Habsburg monarchy, a small cog in the vast imperial machine retooled under Empress Maria Theresa. You've been summoned to assist with an unprecedented endeavor, the conscription and population register of 1754, known simply as the Version Cadaster. For the first time in Austrian history, the monarchy wants to know exactly how many people it rules. But not for curiosity, not for science, not even for administration in the abstract. It is for revenue. And for war. The 7 Years' War looms. Armies must be paid and supplied. Taxes must be regularized. Resources must be predicted. And that means the state can no longer tolerate the vagueness of tradition, oral custom, or outdated tithes. It must measure. You are given a thick sheaf of instructions by the General Commission of Finance. The tone is stern, the margins wide. They leave room for local scribes like you to annotate, clarify, and most importantly, report. You are no longer simply copying, you are now observing. You pack your satchel with forms, ink, and the new standardized population sheets, and begin your rounds. The villages are not prepared. Peasants squint at the forms, What is a permanent inhabitant? Is a child counted if he is not weaned? What of the widow living in her son's barn? The distinctions mean little to them, but to you, they mean everything. Every name written on the form increases the theoretical tax base. Every male of conscription age becomes a potential soldier. Every cow, sheep, and acre adds to the estimated yield. And every blank space is a liability. The instructions demand the following: number of adult males, number of adult females, number of children under 12, number of working animals by type, land under cultivation, in jock or acres, ownership status free, serf, tenant, structures of residence, hut, house, farmstead. The forms are rigid. Life, you quickly discover, is not. You stand in a thatched hut in Lower Austria, interviewing a farmer with 6 children and no documents. He doesn't know his own age. He remembers the year the river flooded and the year the soldiers came, but not the year he was born. You guess based on his appearance and list him as 43. His eldest daughter claims to be 16 but looks no older than 12. You mark her down as 14, just in case. Why? Because 16 might mean a different tax status. And this is the heart of it. The census is not just a record of reality. It creates new categories of reality. The moment you assign a number, you assign a value. To the empire, that value is measured in coin or in flesh. Some villages resist. They've heard rumors that the census is a prelude to land confiscation, that names written on royal paper are cursed, that widows will be forced to remarry to consolidate households, that livestock will be seized. You assure them it's not true, at least not officially. But you don't know for certain. And neither do they. Back in your office, you begin to notice the rhythm of this new bureaucracy. Each form must be copied in triplicate, one for the local archive, one for the provincial commission, one for Vienna. Mistakes must be crossed out, not erased, and initialed. No more flourishes, no Latin, just figures and facts, or at least something close to them. You feel the weight of the change. In earlier days, taxation was negotiated. Nobles paid what they agreed to. Peasants were tithed based on tradition. Now the monarchy seeks a different system, one based on capacity. You're told the goal is fairness, but fairness requires knowledge. And knowledge in this case is harvested by people like you. One afternoon, as you tally forms from 3 nearby villages, you realize something. The more complete your records, the higher their projected tax burden. Your accuracy may be their misfortune. If a village is too honest, it will suffer. If it lies and you catch it, it will be fined. So what are you to do? You begin inserting cautious annotations. Figures likely underreported due to seasonal absence of workers. Age estimates based on local testimony. Household structure ambiguous, see attached statement. These notes buy the villagers a sliver of ambiguity, and perhaps in your heart you feel that the state has enough already. Yet the state wants more. By mid-year, Vienna sends a revision. Now, each entry must include household heads and their relation to the others. Children must be listed in birth order. Widows must note the year of their husband's death. Every detail tightens the administrative grip. And in doing so, the state moves closer to something new: surveillance through record. You sit one evening, exhausted, and reread the forms. It is easy to forget that behind every name is a person. That Merck, age 7, tends goats barefoot. That Rossel widow, age 51, still bakes for 3 families. That Stefan, 22, fears conscription more than death itself. But the form reduces them to metrics, not maliciously, just necessarily. And in that reduction lies the seed of something profound. By making people legible to the state gains power over them. It can plan, it can tax, it can conscript, it can protect or exploit. The paper becomes a proxy for the population, and that proxy can be filed, stamped, forgotten, or used. You hear rumors that in Hungary resistance is fiercer, that some villages burn their census forms, that in Bohemia local nobles refuse to comply, but in your corner of Austria the work continues, quietly, relentlessly. One morning, a woman comes to your door with a question. Her son was listed as age 15 on last year's census. He is now 16. Does that mean he is to be drafted? You pause. You don't know the answer. The instructions are unclear. You tell her that the lists are forwarded to Vienna and that conscription is based on quotas, not age alone. She does not look reassured. She only says, "Then perhaps we should have written 14 instead." You nod. You do not write this conversation down. Instead, you look at your growing stack of bound census volumes. Row upon row of names, ages, animals, acres, neatly catalogued, carefully transcribed, ready to inform the policies of an empire that increasingly governs from afar. And you wonder, at what point does counting people turn into controlling them? It is now 1756. The census has entered its second year. The initial chaos has been refined into a system, though still imperfect, still fragile. In Vienna, the Ministry of Finance boasts of increasing visibility into the productive capacities of the empire. They claim greater efficiency, more accurate taxation, improved recruitment. But from your vantage point, the illusion is paper-thin. You are still a district scribe, though now you hold the title Regierungsregistrator, government registrar. A fine word for a familiar job, transcribing, verifying, and consolidating information gathered from village scribes and minor nobility. Your desk is piled with census forms, some yellowed already, others smudged with rain or soot. You have become fluent in the language of enumeration. You no longer see people as villagers, traders, farmers. You see heads of households, dependent females, male conscripts aged 16 to 30, tithe-exempt clergy, heritable leaseholders, and communal tenants. Your language has shifted because the state's gaze has sharpened. It is no longer interested in who a person is, but in what they produce, owe, and consume. A new directive arrives from the capital. You're now to help assemble the revision lists, cross-checks meant to detect false reports or clerical inconsistencies. The empire does not trust its peripheries. Every number must be confirmed, compared, and reconciled. This means you begin compiling lists of your lists. You track every male conscripted versus every male listed, every tax collected versus every taxable adult. Your job now is not to observe reality, it is to ensure that reality matches paperwork. And when it doesn't, something must give. One example lingers with you. A village near the Hungarian border submitted identical figures 2 years in a row. 132 adults, 49 children, 57 livestock-owning households. Suspicious. You're dispatched to investigate. When you arrive, it becomes clear. The numbers are fabricated. They reflect the expectations of the state, not the realities of the people. You meet the village scribe, a former schoolteacher turned cowherd who confesses. "We didn't lie," he says, "we simply copied what was safe." He tells you that a tax increase had followed the previous report, that new conscription orders arrived within months, that the priest was questioned about why 3 widows were not remarried, that the mere act of filling out the census had brought scrutiny, disruption, fear. So they submitted the same again. You consider reporting the falsification, but what would it change? Punishment, reassessment. You file the report with a careful annotation. Figures confirmed through local review, natural stability of population suspected. Further investigation unnecessary at this time. You have learned to write between the lines. And yet the system tightens. Now there are enumeration codes. Code A for tax-contributing male adult. Code B for tax-exempt clergy. Code C for female dependents. Code D for minors under the age of 12. Code E for unclassifiable, transient or displaced persons. You copy these codes into margins. You begin to build classification ledgers. Entire communities become shorthand. A23B5C 31D14E2. It is not malicious, it is not personal, but it is powerful. Because once a person is assigned a code, a category, they become that designation in the eyes of the state. The nuance of their life, why a widow tends goats, why a child labors instead of attending church, is lost to the binary of forms. Your office begins issuing aggregate summaries, one sheet per district, no names, just totals. These summaries are copied by Vienna's Statistic Registrator, a fledgling body concerned with measuring and modeling the empire. They do not visit villages. They do not meet the people. But their graphs and columns now influence budget allocations and military planning. Their vision of Austria is mathematical, sanitized, efficient. But you know better. You remember the woman whose daughter was left off the list so she could avoid a fine for exceeding household size limits. You remember the peasant who claimed to be a hired hand when he was, in fact, a landowner simply to avoid a conscription letter. You remember the priest who added 2 children to the baptism register after the census, hopping to pad the numbers and maintain his chapel's funding. You've started keeping a small private notebook. Not official, not for submission. Just notes, stories, realities behind the lines. Clara, 15, not listed, cared for invalid father. Not a dependent, not yet married but carried household. Heinrich, 62, listed as laborer. Owns 3 goats, built his own hut. Doesn't speak enough German to explain his title. You know these things will never appear in Vienna's tables, but still, you write them. And as you write, you begin to understand the cost of this new administrative clarity. The census has become a machine for flattening human variation. The state can only govern what it can classify, and what cannot be classified is discarded, misfiled, or misunderstood. Even so, the census continues to expand. By late 1757, new forms arrive: agricultural output estimates, fuel consumption reports, marriage rate surveys. These are meant to provide a complete picture of economic capacity. The forms ask questions like: number of loaves consumed per person per week, typical fuel wood used per winter, age at first childbirth per district. You shake your head. These questions are absurd in their abstraction, but you fill them out as best you can. You write down your estimates, your guesses, your half-truths disguised as figures. Because the form must be filled. One night your apprentice asks you, "Master, if the numbers are guesses, why do we treat them as truth?" You pause, quill in hand. Because once they're written, you say, they become real. To the state, that's all that matters. Your apprentice frowns, but what if it's wrong? You reply more softly, then the empire plans for a fiction, and hopes the people survive it. And that is the secret, isn't it? This census, the most advanced bureaucratic exercise in Austrian history, counts only what it chooses to see. It creates a version of the empire that exists on paper, but only loosely resembles the villages, homes, and humans you encounter. You finish your day by updating the Gesamtable, the master table. You draw the line across the page, close the ledger, and extinguish your lamp. And as you stare into the darkness of your room, you wonder, is it better to be known inaccurately by the state or not to be known at all? It is now 1759. You are deep into your 5th year as a registrar of the Austrian census. The war still smolders across Europe. The 7 Years' War, a distant conflict for many of your villagers, but one that defines your everyday. For the monarchy, victory requires soldiers. Soldiers require planning, and planning requires data. Which is where you come in. Your office has grown. No longer just a room above the guild hall, it's now a multi-chambered district bureau. You have 2 junior clerks, 3 scribes and a courier who rides to Vienna twice monthly with your sealed packets. You have files, drawers, ledgers, stacks of standardized forms organized by year and province. On the wall above your desk, a copy of the imperial edict mandating ongoing revision and expansion of demographic surveys for purposes of taxation, military service, and public provisioning. But outside your windows, reality pulses and shifts in ways no form can catch. In the hills, families move to avoid conscription quotas. In the valleys, widows remarry without notifying the church registrar. Children change households. Names shift spellings. A child listed as Katerina one year reappears as Cattle the next, same girl, new designation. Clerical error or intentional disguise. You stop asking. Instead, you adjust your expectations. You begin to understand that what you're doing is no longer just record keeping. You are manufacturing a fiction the empire can function on. A stable fiction, a necessary one perhaps, but a fiction all the same. You glance at a new imperial form, the Supplemental Labor Classification Register, and marvel at how precisely it fails to capture the fluidity of real life. Enumerate all adult males capable of labor, distinguishing between agrarian, artisanal, and itinerant roles. Indicate the number of days each laborer works on average per week. If a person fulfills multiple roles, list the one in which he is most productive. You sigh, what if a man tends sheep, fixes shoes, and hunts in the forest? What if his work depends on the season, the weather, or whether his daughter is ill? The form doesn't care. You write down what will be believed, not what is necessarily true. And in doing so, you join a quiet consensus that spans every level of the bureaucracy. We must make the empire visible, even if that means smoothing away its truths. But sometimes the truth won't be smoothed. One case refuses to be catalogued. A Romani family on the outskirts of your district has lived for years in a rotating pattern of seasonal labor mending, horse trading, occasional farm work. The census instructions don't know what to do with them. They are not landed. They don't pay fixed taxes. They don't have a church record, but they are there. You've met them. When you list them on the population roll, a note returns from Vienna. Category unclear, reclassify or omit. You try reclassifying them as itinerant laborers, but that is rejected too, so you omit them. Just like that, they vanish from the empire's vision, not because they cease to exist, but because the state lacked a box to put them in. And you begin to see the danger of your work. Because when the state does not see people, it does not plan for them. It does not feed them, protect them, or recognize them. Visibility and value are now the same. What isn't counted isn't real. Yet, even the counted are only real in approximation. You begin to notice how the forms make assumptions about household structure, about gender roles, about work. A widow is always listed as a dependent, but you've met widows who run farms, manage 3 households, lead entire villages by quiet force of will. There is no code for that. A teenage girl who works in the tannery and tends her siblings is still marked unproductive female. There is no code for that either. The deeper you go, the more clearly you see it. This census does not describe Austria. It describes a version of Austria that Vienna wants to manage. One day, you return to a village you surveyed 5 years ago. A boy you once listed as 8 is now 13. His mother thanks you for keeping him off the rolls. You, forgotten. But apparently you'd marked him as 7 instead of 8 at the time, just enough to delay his appearance on the conscription list. He hugs you, he is safe for now. You wonder how many of your mistakes have become protection, and how many have become burdens. You walk past rows of shacks and manors, all cataloged in your ledgers. You know which households are listed as wealthy, which is poor, which is neutral. But you also know that many have changed. There's no mechanism to update every shift. every reversal. You begin to suspect that the further these records move from reality, the more real they become to the administration, at least. And now a new directive arrives. The imperial cadastre is to be updated every 3 years, with revisions logged in a centralized demographic registry. Vienna wants dynamic data, a living census. But the burden of this, will fall on scribes like you, sifting truth from guesswork, certainty from supposition, flesh and blood from ink and seal. You look over your archive, box after box of people reduced to numbers. Not for evil purposes. Not even for control, at least not overtly. But because governance has become too big, too abstract to run on trust alone. And the only tool large enough to hold the empire is paper. You sit one night, long after your scribes have gone home, and open your private notebook, the one you never submit. You read your old notes. Jakob, 63, lists himself as 47, looks ashamed, doesn't want to lose farm tax status. Marguerite, 12, runs household alone since mother's death, listed as dependent. 3 children unlisted, names known only to local priest, not baptized, hidden. You close the book. You don't burn it. You don't file it. You keep it. Because it contains something the empire will never know, the margins of its own reality. And so the census continues. With every name, every line, the Habsburg bureaucracy strengthens its grasp, but it also blinds itself bit by bit to what lies beyond its forms. And as you dip your quill once more, you ask yourself, can an empire that only sees what it can count ever truly know what it governs? Story 4. The Emperor's Ledger: How Charles VI Kept Account of a Crumbling Empire. It is the early 18th century. You are standing in the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, but not in the halls where diplomats dance and princes whisper. No, you are below them in a windowless room lit by oil lamps and ringed with cabinets. Shelves creak under the weight of ledgers bound in green leather. Quills scratch across parchment. The air smells faintly of ink and damp wool. This is the Rechnungsstube des Kaisers, the Emperor's accounting chamber. And the man at the top, Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor, may be known for grand ambitions, his claim to the Spanish throne, the pragmatic sanction, the ornate pageantry of his court, but here, he is something else. Here, Charles VI is a man obsessed with ledgers. You are a Kammersecretär, a chamber secretary, one of dozens. Your job, tabulate, cross-reference, and validate every incoming and outgoing expense from across the imperial domains. Horses, uniforms, salt shipments, grain stockpiles, weapons contracts, bridge repairs, wine imports for court feasts, all of it passes through these pages. And there are so many pages. Because Charles VI governs an empire stitched together by marriage, war, and compromise. He rules over Austrians, Hungarians, Bohemians, Lombards, Belgians, Croats, and more. Each region speaks a different language, pays different taxes, and follows different laws. The only common thread between them: the Emperor's ledger. And this ledger is not metaphorical, it is literal. Bound in calfskin, its title embossed in Latin, Status Imperialis, Rations Anni Domini M16VI. You open it daily. Each region has a section, each page a series of lines. Revenue, excise duties, Buda, April quarter. Expenditure, wagon repair, Army of Lombardy, July. Emergency levy, contribution of Lower Austria per imperial decree. Every figure must be documented with a receipt or decree. If no document exists, the entry is flagged for investigation. Delays are punished. Errors corrected and annotated. Nothing is allowed to be approximate. Charles VI demands numbers, real numbers. It is exhausting. Because the empire, in truth, runs not on clarity but compromise. Half the taxes owed by Hungary are delayed by local resistance. War in Italy drains the treasury faster than the ledgers can record. Customs officials in Galicia file reports months late. Soldiers requisition supplies without proper forms. And still, the emperor wants order. So you provide it. You smooth inconsistencies. You combine similar categories. You clarify ambiguous receipts. You even invent plausible figures for regions too remote to confirm. Everyone does it. Not to deceive, but to survive the weight of administration. To serve the emperor's need for legibility, even when the empire itself is becoming less legible with every passing year. And Charles VI reads your work. Unlike many monarchs, he reviews summaries personally. Each quarter, you prepare a digest of revenues and expenditures. He examines it line by line. He makes notes in the margins in his own hand. Why is salt yield in G. Munden declining? Compare this to 1710 figures. Increase levy on Silesian glassmakers. This is not the behavior of a distant autocrat. It is the behavior of a man who believes the empire can be managed, balanced, made efficient, preserved by precision. But precision is not enough. The costs mount. The War of the Spanish Succession had emptied the coffers before Charles even took the throne. Now the War of the Quadruple Alliance bleeds the treasury again. The imperial army must be fed, clothed, moved. Diplomats demand bribes. Princes need pensions. Fortresses need repairs. The Danube floods. Plague strikes. Your ledger becomes a ledger of failure. Each month expenses outpace income. Each solution, new taxes, new loans, new duties, creates new resentments. The nobility protests. The clergy complains. Merchants hoard. Still, Charles persists. He issues decree after decree demanding rationalization of imperial finance. He creates new bodies. The Hofkammer Court Chamber, the Reichsschafrat Imperial Council, the Commerce-Collegium Commerce Board. They all demand more paperwork, more reports, more ledgers. You begin to spend more time organizing reports than interpreting them. And you notice a pattern. The more the empire weakens, the more paper it produces. As if bureaucracy could compensate for decay. As if the act of recording, categorizing, indexing, binding could reverse the slow crumbling of unity. There is no greater example than the pragmatic sanction of 1713. Charles VI's obsession, his desperate attempt to secure succession rights for his daughter Maria Theresa. You copy the edict into multiple languages: Latin, German, Czech, Hungarian. You draft transcriptions for every regional diet. You file imperial confirmations. You file confirmations of confirmations. And yet behind the mountain of stamped pages, the truth is brittle. Many states agree in writing but not in spirit. Their signatures are diplomatic currency, granted now, revoked later. But to Charles, the signatures are sacred, proof that the ledger is balanced, that the empire will endure. You realize something troubling. Charles is trying to govern through paper, not just with it. He believes that if every revenue, every policy, every succession plan is written, sealed, and stored, it will become reality. But he forgets what you, the clerk, see every day. That the ink often dries far from the truth. You draft reports that say contributions collected when they are still pending. You file receipts for grain that rotted en route. You confirm troop readiness based on rosters you know to be inflated, not from malice, from necessity. Because the emperor wants numbers. And you give him numbers. Because if the ledger appears balanced, perhaps the empire can be said to stand. Still, as you close the great volume one late winter evening, you hesitate. You flip back to an old entry. 1723, surplus recorded, 124,000 gulden. You remember that year. There was no surplus, just a delay in troop payments. The soldiers were paid later from the next quarter's funds, the books balanced on paper. The reality: hunger, desertion, disease. But the record lives on. And in 1,000 years, Someone may read that page and believe that 1723 was a year of prosperity. You wonder, what is an empire if its truth lives only in ledgers and those ledgers lie? It is 1732. Charles VI has been emperor for over 2 decades. He still walks through the Hofburg's endless corridors in polished black boots, draped in velvet, flanked by advisors who bow just slightly too long. But behind his regal bearing lies something else: exhaustion. You see it in his marginalia. The emperor still reviews your ledgers, still annotates expense reports, still demands quarterlies from the Hofkammer. But his notes have grown terse. The questions have grown sharper. Why is Bohemian silver output declining? Who approved this debt extension in Carniola? How do we reduce military garrison costs in the Banat? The questions show awareness but also futility. He's still playing the game, but the pieces are moving on their own now. You are now senior secretary to the Chamber's fiscal operations. You oversee summaries from 6 provinces. You no longer copy reports by hand. You review and approve them. You've gained a reputation: cautious, exacting, and more importantly, loyal. So when the emperor issues an order for a full audit of the Habsburg finances, you are one of 3 men trusted to compile the master balance. It is to be called the Kaiserliche Haushaltsabschätzung, the imperial household estimate. It sounds innocent, bureaucratic, but everyone knows what it is. A reckoning. You begin with income: crown lands, customs duties, salt monopolies, religious tithes redirected to the state, war reparations most unpaid, forced loans, polite term for emergency levies. The numbers look impressive at first, until you begin the deductions. Because every region shaves its figures. Bohemia claims crop failures. Hungary protests noble exemptions. Lombardy delays funds to build local fortifications. And in the Austrian heartlands, nobles increasingly pay late or not at all. And the debts, they fill pages. Loans to fund wars, most bearing interest from Genoese or Amsterdam financiers. Pensions to generals and widows. Imperial obligations to minor princes. Military upkeep, inflated by corruption and incompetence. Cost of courtly display: masked balls, royal hunts, diplomatic gifts to maintain dignity among rivals. When you balance it all, the result is staggering. A deficit so wide it cannot be disguised. But you must try. So you follow the quiet tradition of paper trimming. You defer certain expenses to next year. You double-list expected incomes. You correct errors from provincial reports. You create the illusion of motion, of progress, just enough to avoid panic. Because panic, in a fragile empire, spreads faster than ink. When you present the final draft to the Hofkammer president, he nods gravely. No surprise. Everyone knew the finances were unbalanced. But there's something different in his eyes now: acceptance. The state cannot stop this decline, it can only slow it. And the way to slow it: more records, more audits, more adjustments, more paper. Meanwhile, outside Vienna, people feel the difference. In Lower Austria, tax collectors demand grain from villages that have no surplus. Families leave for Hungary, where enforcement is weaker. In Bohemia, local militias disband themselves, unpaid and disillusioned. Roads go unrepaired. Docks rot. The imperial post delays letters by weeks. But in your files, everything looks under control. Because delays are not listed, just totals. Because crumbling bridges are noted simply as pending maintenance. Because absent soldiers still appear in rosters. The documents tell one story. The empire tells another. And you begin to feel it in your bones, that slow, growing gap between what's written and what's true. The same feeling you had 10 years ago when you realized the salt output figures from Hallstatt hadn't changed in 4 years. How could that be? The answer: they hadn't been measured, just copied forward. Everyone assumes someone else is checking. But no one is. Charles VI continues to demand summaries and you deliver them. He reads, he underlines, he dictates policy, but his decisions are increasingly built on abstractions. You know it. He must suspect it, but the machinery moves forward regardless. The pragmatic sanction, his great legacy, has now been approved by most European states, or so the emperor believes, but you've seen the correspondences. You know that several of those approvals were vague at best, promises made in exchange for favors, some unsigned, others revoked before the ink dried. Still, they are listed in the imperial index as ratified. You add them yourself, you don't even blink now. Because if the document says it, then it is. That is the central faith of the imperial bureaucracy. Late one evening, you open a volume labeled Emergency War Fund Disbursements, 1727-1730. It's heavy. Inside, you find a set of payments to an army that was never deployed, ships built and never launched, forts that were never completed. But the money is gone, and the signatures are there. What can you do? You write a note. Records appear irregular, original receipts unavailable, confirmation pending. No one will follow up. Not because they don't care, but because the empire is too large, too tangled, too reliant on appearance. To investigate would mean to unravel, and no one wants to see the seams. You think of Charles VI, still reading reports in his private chamber, hoping that if enough numbers add up, the empire will hold. And you wonder, does he know? Does he realize that the act of counting, of tracking, listing, measuring has become detached from the world it claims to represent? Or has he come to believe the numbers are the world? You set your pen down, you close the ledger. You make one last annotation in the margin. All entries consistent with expectations. You lie, but only because the truth has already slipped beyond the margins. And you ask yourself, when the ledgers are the last thing standing, what happens when even they begin to crack? It is 1740. The ledgers are closed. Charles VI has died. He passed in his palace after a sudden illness, attended by doctors who bled him dutifully until it was clear that neither leech nor prayer would reverse the inevitable. Bells tolled throughout Vienna. Mourning draperies were hung. The imperial court moved in slow motion, caught between protocol and fear. Because his death brings more than grief. It brings uncertainty. He left no male heir. Only his daughter, Maria Theresa, young, intelligent, untested. And though Charles spent much of his reign issuing decrees and dispatching envoys to secure the pragmatic sanction, no one truly believes the paper will be enough. His ledgers cannot enforce loyalty. His declarations cannot stop ambition. Within weeks, rival claimants emerge. Bavaria, Prussia, Spain, they all question Maria Theresa's legitimacy. Some never agreed to the sanction. Others had, but now pretend they hadn't. The ink has dried, but the will behind it has vanished. You are still in the Hofkammer, now one of its most senior clerks. You were there when Charles signed his final fiscal summary. You saw the lines he underlined. You remember the very last annotation he wrote in the margin of the master ledger. Maintain the army's grain reserves. Anticipate unrest. He was right. The War of the Austrian Succession breaks out by year's end. Armies mobilize, borders shift, Vienna trembles. And yet the accounting continues. It is a strange paradox. The empire wavers, but the books must be balanced. Even as Prussian troops move into Silesia, even as Austrian troops scramble to prepare defenses, even as ministers debate treaties and tributes, you are still processing quarterlies. Your desk holds two piles. Receipts from the court suppliers, candles, wool, powdered wigs, horseshoes. Claims from frontier garrisons, musket powder, bread, salt, pork. The forms are marked urgent. You process them at the same pace you always have. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has. The new empress, Maria Theresa, visits the chambers within weeks of her ascension. She wants to understand her inheritance, not the jewels or titles, but the numbers. You watch from a respectful distance as she pages through the summary volumes. She asks a single question aloud. How much of this was ever real? No one answers, because everyone in the room knows that the books have always told a half-truth. They were a mirror, not of the world itself, but of the world as the empire needed it to be. And now the empire needs something more. So begins the empress's reforms. She creates new review committees. She orders land surveys. She begins to demand verification, not just reports. Auditors are sent to Hungary, to Bohemia, to Lombardy. For the first time, Vienna's courtrooms fill not just with nobles, but with statisticians, legal codifiers, and proto-economists. The work you helped institutionalize is being dissected, improved, and above all challenged. You are asked to review your own ledgers. You find inconsistencies in old reports, figures that were too round, receipts that don't match. You remember entering them. You remember the urgency, the pressure, the invisible rule. Don't disrupt the illusion. Now you are asked to clarify, to reconcile, to admit. It is uncomfortable. But Maria Theresa insists the empire must know itself. Still, not everything can be rewritten. Too much has already calcified. Many of Charles's decrees remain binding, not because they were wise, but because they were written. His succession crisis, born of paper, now echoes in new laws and institutional shifts. You find yourself opening his personal ledger one last time, the thick book he annotated for over 2 decades. You turn to the first page. Accountability is the weight of the crown. Charles VI. You turn to the last. All recorded, all confirmed. The rest is in God's hands. Charles VI. And you realize something that chills you. He truly believed it. He believed the records would hold, that a well-kept empire on paper could sustain itself through policy, principle, and careful annotation, that the ink would keep the realm together. And for a while it did. But now, with Europe at war, Austria in crisis, and the Empress facing revolt and debt, you see what Charles could not. That bureaucracy may outlive a man, but it cannot replace his power. You close the ledger. You return it to the archival vault. And as the door locks behind you, you think of the thousands of entries made under Charles's reign, the salt taxes recorded in Sankt Pölten, the troops' salaries logged in Graz, the failed infrastructure projects in Transylvania, the royal pageants in Vienna. All written, all categorized, all stored. But what now? The paper survives, but the world it once described imperfectly, aspirationally, cautiously has moved on. New borders, new wars, new alliances, new monarch. Yet the old ledgers remain. And future generations will read them. They will tally the columns. They will study Charles's annotations. They may even believe in their accuracy. But you will always know. They were built to hold the illusion of control, long after the control itself had faded. Story 5. Maria Theresa's Paper Crown Administrative Reforms from the Throne. The year is 1741. Maria Theresa is 23 years old. She wears the Habsburg crown, not as a conqueror, but as a woman surrounded by men questioning her every decree. The Holy Roman Empire denies her legitimacy. Prussia has seized Silesia. France, Bavaria, and Saxony circle like wolves. The War of the Austrian Succession is not merely a conflict of swords, it is a contest of systems. And Maria Theresa knows her system is broken. You are a government secretary and archivist elevated to administrative assistant in the Hofkanzlei, the heart of imperial governance in Vienna. You were trained under Charles VI. You still think in categories, in columns, in margins. But under Maria Theresa, your world is changing. She does not govern like her father. Charles VI believed in paperwork as a shield. If everything was documented, all would be protected. Maria Theresa believes in paperwork as a tool. Her first move is not ceremonial. It is bureaucratic. She calls for a full audit of the state's financial administration. Not a general overview, not a symbolic gesture, but a forensic dissection of where every cruiser goes. You are summoned to assist. You sit in a cold, bright room in the Hofburg. Around you, statisticians, clerks, tax experts, and military accountants. A young minister named Hogwitz, tall, serious, unflinching, leads the discussion. He speaks in clipped sentences. We cannot defend an empire if we do not know how it works. He lays out the reality. The empire's financial records are a mess. Every province has its own tax codes. The nobility are largely exempt. The Catholic Church controls vast estates that pay nothing. The army is underfed and underpaid. Monopolies leak revenue. Records are duplicated, sometimes falsified, often missing. You glance down at the copy of a land register from Moravia. 73 noble families listed as self-sustaining, meaning tax-free. Beside it, a peasant household paying 4 times. Story 5. Maria Theresa's paper crown, administrative reforms from the throne. It is 1740. The court is draped in black. The priests chant Latin prayers behind thick doors. The Habsburg crest hangs limp in the palace wind. Charles VI is dead, and his empire, so often stitched together by decrees, marriages, and seals, has passed into the hands of a woman. You are now in the Hofkanzlei, the central chancery, a long, echoing hall lined with clerks and cabinets. You were there when Charles died, and now, weeks later, you're still here watching history fold in on itself. Her name is Maria Theresa, 23 years old, barely seated on the throne before the empire starts to unravel. Bavaria contests her claim. Prussia moves into Silesia. The War of the Austrian Succession has begun, and Vienna braces itself for the unthinkable, the possibility that the Habsburgs could fall. But Maria Theresa is not her father. Where Charles VI governed by precedent, she governs by necessity. Where he relied on a stable system, she sees a broken one. And so begins the most sweeping transformation the Austrian state has ever known. Not with a battle, not with a marriage. With paperwork. You're assigned to a new working group, the Commission for Administrative Rectification. The title is vague, but the work is clear: fix the mess. Maria Theresa wants everything examined: the tax system, the census, the military payroll, even the imperial calendar. If it's on paper, it's up for revision. You begin with taxation. The current system is a medieval patchwork. Nobles pay little, peasants pay too much, and entire provinces report their income in bundles of outdated grain tallies. There are at least 12 different weights and measures in use. Some towns pay their taxes in salt, others in cloth. Some haven't paid at all, hiding behind charters granted by long-dead emperors. Your first task is to catalog the exemptions. You find pages and pages of them. A noble family exempted from land tax in 1621 for services rendered. A town excused from customs duties due to a plague in 1683, still uncorrected. A bishopric paying only 1/10 of its due, citing spiritual privilege. Maria Theresa reads the summaries and is incensed. These privileges were meant to be temporary, she tells her ministers. Why are they still binding? The room is silent. Because everyone knows the truth. No one wanted to challenge them, until now. She orders a complete audit of tax exemptions across the empire. You oversee the Bohemian reports. For months, you read pleas, protests, and justifications some centuries old, some hand-copied from brittle scrolls. The old habit persists: if it's written, it must be honored. But Maria Theresa isn't interested in tradition. She's interested in solvency. When the audits are done, she signs a sweeping decree. All exemptions must be justified annually or be revoked. The nobility is outraged. The clergy panics. Petitions flood the chancery. You help sort them. Most are vague. Some cite ancient privileges. Others threaten rebellion. But the empress does not bend. She is polite, even pious, but immovable. She has inherited an empire of shadows and is determined to turn it into something legible. Next comes the military registry. In theory, every eligible man in the empire is recorded, ranked, and available for conscription. In practice, the army payroll lists thousands of ghost soldiers, men who never existed or deserted long ago. Officers draw pay for them anyway. Regiments exist on paper but nowhere else. You are given access to the 1739 muster rolls. You compare them to the 1740 census. The results are absurd. A regiment in Galicia supposedly includes 432 men. The census lists only 289 men of fighting age in the entire district. Another unit in Tyrol reports full readiness, but letters from the region mention desertion, famine, and mutiny. You present the inconsistencies to your supervisor. He sighs, then shrugs. Everyone known for years, but no one wants to write it down. Until now. Maria Theresa orders the first standardized imperial conscription audit. Real names, real bodies, no estimates, no substitutions. Clerks are dispatched with orders to inspect each unit in person. It is a logistical nightmare. Some are stoned in villages. Others are turned away by local barons who consider it an insult. But the numbers begin to arrive. And they're damning. Entire units evaporate under scrutiny. Officers are arrested. The military budget shrinks not from cuts, but from reality. You help draft the new army ledger. It is clean, modular, cross-referenced with the tax rolls. No flourishes, no traditions, just facts. It becomes a model. And Maria Theresa is just getting started. She creates a new board, the General Directory, a centralized bureaucracy designed to coordinate rather than react. It connects finance, military, agriculture, and education under a single administrative philosophy. The keyword is standardization. You begin to notice changes. New forms are printed on matching paper stock. Edicts are distributed with index numbers. Regional offices begin using a shared seal style. Instructions are issued for margin widths, signature placement, even ink color. It feels obsessive, but it works. For the first time, reports from Moravia resemble those from Styria. Budget requests follow a shared template. Population counts are aggregated monthly. The Empress does not call it reform, she calls it order. You attend a meeting once, invited to present findings from your audit. She listens quietly, eyes fixed on the page. When you finish, she asks, "How many people did we think we had in 1740? You reply, 36 million. And how many did we have? You hesitate. About 31, Your Majesty. She nods. Then for 5 million we taxed ghosts and fed shadows. That ends now. That sentence stays with you, because you realize what she's truly doing. She is not just managing decline. She is reshaping the very idea of monarchy, one that does not rely on favor, tradition, or inherited disorder, but one rooted in information, in administration, in the truth of paper. And yet not everyone agrees. Resistance simmers in Hungary, in Lombardy, even in Vienna. Some claim her reforms destroy the spirit of the empire. Others fear the loss of their own quiet privileges. A few grumble that a woman has no right to rule without compromise. She listens, she smiles. Then she stamps the next decree. And you keep writing, because you are part of a new empire now. One not built on battlefield victories or noble genealogies, but on audits, ledgers, registries, and forms. Still, you wonder, can a paper crown truly hold an empire of flesh and blood? It is now 1750, 10 years into Maria Theresa's reign. The wars still rage in the distance. Silesia remains in Prussian hands and parts of the nobility remain hostile. But within the walls of Vienna and in the files piling up in government offices across the monarchy, another war is being waged, a quieter one. It's not a war of muskets or cannons. It's a war fought with forms, curricula, seals, and statistics. You're still a civil servant. You were promoted last year Director of Provincial Correspondence, a title that means you now oversee all reports filed by regional administrators before they're reviewed by the Staatsrat, the newly created State Council. In practice, this means that every week you sort through parcels of documents that arrive by horse cart from the farthest reaches of the empire: Galicia, Bukovina, Transylvania, the Tyrol. Your job isn't just to read them. Your job is to detect inconsistency. The Empress has made it clear. The only empire worth ruling is one that understands itself. So now the Staatsrat must understand the numbers: grain outputs, child mortality, parish school attendance, tax payments, livestock yields. You've been instructed to flag any district whose totals don't match known averages. You create internal benchmarks. You compile tables. You begin to understand what it means to govern through comparison. It is tedious, but it is working. Each year, the empire's vision becomes sharper. The population estimates grow more precise. The tax rolls more even. The supply chains more responsive. Vienna can now predict how many school-aged children live in each region. It can estimate within 500 gulden how much customs revenue should come from a Danube port. And this brings you to your next frontier: education. The Empress has turned her attention to schools because she understands something extraordinary for her time. Bureaucracy is not self-sustaining, it must be taught. So she creates the Normalschule reform, a program designed to bring state-controlled, standardized education to every village and city in the empire. The goals are deceptively simple. Every child, boys and girls, must learn to read and write. Instruction must be in the state's approved curriculum. All teachers must be licensed and trained by the state. At first, it's met with disbelief. Not resistance, just confusion. You travel with an inspector to a village in Inner Austria. The local priest, who teaches the village's handful of children, is alarmed. "You mean to tell me," he says, "that the government wants me to teach from a book printed in Vienna, that I must pass an exam?" You nod. He frowns, "And if I refuse?" The inspector replies, "Then we will send someone who will." In reality, they rarely need to. The promise of imperial funding plus the implied threat of removal is enough to convince most clergy to comply. You review the new school registers. Names of enrolled children. Subjects taught. Attendance records. Progress scores. Each file comes with the newly introduced state seal of instruction, stamped in red wax. It is a minor detail, but it is brilliant. Because with every form sealed, every child recorded, every curriculum filed, the empire becomes more knowable, more trackable, more coherent. And Maria Theresa doesn't stop there. She standardizes weights and measures, ending centuries of regional variation. A loaf in Bohemia is now the same weight as one in Carinthia. A yard of cloth in Tyrol is identical to that in Vienna. The merchant class grumbles at first, but quickly adapts. Uniformity benefits trade. And now, the Hofkammer can actually calculate production across regions using common metrics. She restructures law codes, too. For years, Austrian justice had been a patchwork of Roman law, feudal customs, ecclesiastical courts, and noble privileges. Now, a new code is introduced, the Codex Thersienus. You helped draft the internal index for its first release. It's massive pages and pages of dense Latin and High German, but for the first time, there is an attempt to systematize justice across the empire. It is law as policy, not just tradition. Each region receives printed copies. Clerks are instructed to annotate and return their feedback. Even judges must comply, and they do. Because the bureaucracy is no longer just a tool of the crown. It is becoming the cultural spine of the state. You begin to see a shift. A new generation of administrators now writes in the same official style. They follow the same templates. They read the same decrees. They are, in a way, learning to think like the state. One morning, a young clerk from Moravia sends you a copy of a tax roll that matches the imperial format exactly down to the ink color and spacing. You don't know his name. You've never met him. But in his format, in his phrasing, in his seal placement, you recognize a colleague. This, you realize, is the silent brilliance of Maria Theresa's reforms. She is creating a shared identity not through flags or songs, but through shared paperwork. Still, the reforms are not perfect. Some regions resist school mandates. Others falsify grain reports. A few nobles quietly erase pages of the new law books and replace them with older customs. But the overall trend is undeniable. The empire is becoming standardized, predictable, visible, and with that visibility comes governability. You look at a new annual digest compiled in the capital. It includes a map of primary schools, color-coded by attendance, a breakdown of regional salt exports, a graph showing military recruitment rates over time, an index of tax exemptions, newly narrowed by audit. You are holding, in your hands, the closest thing the Habsburg Empire has ever had to self-knowledge. And yet you pause, because you know how many of these numbers were revised, smoothed, guessed. You wonder, is an empire truly rational just because it speaks in data, or has the appearance of order replaced its substance? It is 1765. The empire is more legible than ever. The war years have waned, at least on paper. The border lines are mostly fixed. The tax flows are steady. The school reports arrive regularly. From Galicia to the Adriatic, the imperial bureaucracy pulses with a kind of rhythm. Everything population counts, harvest yields, marriage certificates, livestock inventories is known, or at least written down to give the illusion of knowledge. And yet, there's a quiet exhaustion beneath the surface. You are nearing retirement now. The curls of your handwriting are a little slower. Your eyes sting more often in the candlelight. You oversee a team of junior clerks who read, file, and annotate the very reforms you once helped initiate. Sometimes, when they ask questions about the origins of certain practices, why tax forms must be folded a particular way, why Latin is still required in certain provinces, you catch yourself smiling. They no longer remember the world before the system. But you do. You remember when taxation was a negotiation, when each province had its own rules, its own weights, its own handwriting. You remember scribes improvising their titles, forging seals, reinventing formats every few miles. You remember when an empire was something barely held together by the authority of a surname and a sword. Now it's held together by something much more delicate. Paper. Maria Theresa still reigns, and she does so from her writing desk as often as from her throne. Her advisors joke respectfully that she has read more decrees than many nobles have sermons. She reviews budgets. She annotates margins. She even writes in her own hand when corresponding with provincial governors. One of your colleagues calls her Die Schreibende Majestat, the writing majesty. But her writing is not ornamental. It is a continuation of rule by record. This is most evident in her handling of cadastral reform, a bureaucratic effort so ambitious it makes even seasoned civil servants tremble. The goal: to map, measure, and tax every parcel of land in the empire. It is the final step in her dream of rational governance. Not only people and professions and outputs, but soil itself must be known to the state. You receive the directives in the spring of 1766. Surveyors must visit every farm, village, and manor. Field books must be compiled in duplicate. Land quality must be evaluated and ranked: fertile, marginal, poor. Ownership must be verified with documentation. Maps must be drawn to scale. You are too senior to travel now, but you oversee the reports. They arrive in batches: thick rolls of parchment from Moravia, wax-sealed portfolios from the Banat, sketches and property declarations from Carinthia. What strikes you is how much people now expect to be documented. Landowners submit surveys before being asked. Peasants carry scraps of title, hopping to prove ownership. Clergy request instructions on how to report church lands. Where once the empire ruled by precedent, it now rules by paperwork. You flip through a field book from Tyrol. It lists: owner Jacob Unterweger. Plot size 3.7 jock. Soil condition: gravel loam moderately fertile. Output: oats, cabbage. Taxable value: 48 gulden per annum. It is clinical, mechanical, but strangely beautiful. Each entry is a fragment of a much larger mosaic, the kind Maria Theresa envisioned. Not just an empire that feels united, but one that can be calculated. Still, not everything fits. Some regions report unusable land as productive to avoid penalties. Others hide ownership behind forged documents. You see places where the surveyor's neat lines clash with actual paths trodden by animals and feet. And always, there are places the paper cannot reach: Roma encampments, forest dwellers, mountain hamlets who have never met an official. You begin to suspect that the state, for all its reach, only governs where its paper goes. And yet Maria Theresa persists. In 1767, she issues the final version of the herbarium, a monumental register of feudal obligations. It lists, village by village, what each peasant owes to each landlord. It is copied, bound, and sent to district offices across the realm. This is the bureaucratic equivalent of a sword. Because now peasants can challenge their lords. Now obligations are not spoken, they are written. Now justice is not a matter of favor, it is a matter of record. You hear rumors of villages celebrating when the new herbarium arrives, treating it as a kind of liberation document. You hear stories of landowners fuming, discovering that their informal privileges are no longer enforceable. And you see the quiet power Maria Theresa has wielded. Without revolution, without uprisings, without fire or blood, she has changed the empire from within through the structure of how it records itself. One afternoon, you attend a meeting in Vienna with younger officials. You are asked to give a lecture on the evolution of the tax form. You speak of the early chaos, of Charles VI's ledgers, of the copying errors, of the first population register, of the mistranslations and the blank margins. You explain how Maria Theresa required not just more information, but better information, clearer, fairer, more actionable. At the end, someone asks, "Do you think her system will last?" You pause. You think of the tens of thousands of pages, the schoolchildren now reciting imperial geography, the villages redrawn by surveyors, the courts interpreting laws written just a decade ago. You think of the new clerks, who assume the forms have always looked this way. You say, "It will last as long as it is read." And you believe it. But privately, you reflect on a truth you dare not say aloud. Every system, no matter how perfect on paper, is only as strong as the hands that hold the quill. And though the ink of Maria Theresa's reforms is fresh and bold now, someday it will fade. The maps will yellow, the forms will change, the state will grow or fracture, and someone, centuries from now, may look upon these records as curiosities, or warnings. You leave the chancery for the last time in autumn. The halls are quieter than they used to be. The paper smells the same. And as you pass by the registry, you glance at a new form tacked to the wall. It's clean, symmetrical, multilingual. It bears the seal of the Crown. And it reads, "All entries must be verified, signed, and preserved." You smile, because in those 7 words lies the legacy of an empress who wore her crown not only on her head, but in every scroll, ledger, and statute she ever touched. Story 6. Dust and Dockets, the Tax Collectors of Lower Austria. It is the year 1772. The war drums have quieted, the borders hold for now. But inside the empire, life continues in its most unremarkable, yet essential rhythm, the collection of taxes. And in Lower Austria, a fertile land of wheat fields, wine villages, and modest hills, the work is not glorious. It is, however, constant, relentless, and most importantly, recorded. You are assigned to the Reichsfinanzaufsicht, the Imperial Fiscal Inspectorate, as a deputy collector in the quarter of Krems. Your appointment is stamped with a wax seal, bearing both the imperial double eagle and a long Latin phrase you've never dared to translate. Your instructions are precise. Visit each taxable estate twice yearly. Assess yields, gather levies in cash or kind. Record transactions. Submit summaries to Vienna. And above all, avoid conflict. Because despite what the forms may say, the people do not love tax collectors. Your first task is to ride to 12 villages, each with their own dialects, customs, and peculiar excuses. You carry with you a satchel of blank registers, a sealed tin of wax, and a travel chest of coins and valuation slips. You are not a soldier, but your presence is a form of authority, not backed by musket but by decree. In the first village, you are met with cautious nods. The mayor, a cobbler by trade, brings you last year's harvest figures. They are scribbled on scrap linen. You ask him to recite the figures aloud. He does. You compare them to your preliminary estimates. They differ. You ask for explanation. He blames late rains. You note the discrepancy in your logbook. Actual barley yield may be 18% under last year's average, unverified. This phrase will travel eventually to a desk in Vienna. Someone you will never meet may use it to revise a future tariff. That's the strange thing about your work. It is immense in consequence, yet invisible in the moment. The next village is different. The priest handles all records. He welcomes you into a cool stone rectory and unrolls a parchment with exact, lettered figures. Rye, 121 sacks. Chicken, 34 hens, 9 cocks. Firewood tithe, 5 cords stacked and counted. You record it all. You use the new standard weights approved by the Kammer in 1768. You sign the bottom with your initials, then press the tax stamp onto the page. This seal alone makes the document official. Without it, the entire process is theatrical. You sleep that night in a hayloft. There are no inns. A farmer offers bread and sour wine. You share a bench with 2 laborers who eye your coat, your satchel, and your hands clean, unscarred, civil. They ask if the empress truly needs their taxes. You offer the rehearsed reply. The state is like a great body. Each arm must support the other. They grunt. You don't press further, because your job is not persuasion, it is documentation. By the end of the week, you've visited 6 settlements. You've marked down. An illegal still in the watch. A barn collapsed by snow, reducing taxable yield. A widow who owes 6 kreuzer, but offers dried apples instead. A schoolteacher's side income from beekeeping, undeclared. Each line matters, not because the figures are large, but because the pattern matters. The empire does not function because of one great tax windfall. It functions because it can expect all of them, all the time, from everyone. But there is resistance, always just below the surface. In the seventh village, you are met by silence. No one comes to the square. The mayor is away. A child whispers that her father told her to hide the grain sacks. You wait in the chapel. Eventually, a man arrives. He offers a single page. You recognize the format. It's last year's report unchanged. You ask, where is the new inventory? He shrugs, nothing changed. It is a lie. The rains were different. The vineyards grew late. Everyone knows it, but confronting him risks anger. And without soldiers or sanction, your only weapon is your pen. So you write. Yields identical to prior year. Source uncertain. Possible withholding. Your entry is precise, neutral, cold. The moment passes and you move on. You wonder what Vienna does with such entries. Do they trigger reviews, penalties, or do they simply vanish into the vast architecture of documents, so many shelves, so many rooms? Back in Krems, you submit your binder to the regional office. It is weighed, stamped, and filed. No one reads it aloud. No ceremony, no thanks. Just bureaucracy, hungry, quiet, and endless. And yet you feel a strange pride. Not in power, not in fear, but in participation. You are part of the mechanism that makes the imperial system real, a bridge between parchment and peasantry. You do not rule, but you record, and what is not recorded in this empire does not exist. You think of the cobbler, the priest, the silent mayor. Their names will never grace marble, but they will live on faintly in margins and footnotes. In the empire's future surveys, someone may ask, why did barley yields drop in Krems in 1772? And there, in small cursive ink, they will find your note. The spring of 1773 arrives with thawing fields and renewed paperwork. You've now spent over a year on horseback and foot, riding across Lower Austria's vineyards and wheat fields, cataloging the harvests of ordinary lives. The work is not glamorous, but it is essential. And now, for the first time, you are to take part in the quarterly consolidation, the gathering of revenue officers from across the province. It takes place in a repurposed grain hall in St. Pölten. Inside, long oak tables creak under piles of ledgers. The air smells of ink and straw. Dozens of taxmen, auditors, and clerks gather, most like you, stoop-shouldered, quiet, meticulously organized. They don't speak of politics or court gossip. They speak of discrepancies, of missing receipts, of estates that underreport sheep or overreport storm damage. You listen as one inspector recounts a noble estate where tenants are forced to pay rent in advance, while the owner claims crop failure for tax exemption. Another reports a fishing village that inflated its population by listing the same 12 men in multiple households. Each tale is bureaucratically dry and yet somehow thrilling. Each reveals how the empire both bends and resists its own systems. Your own entries from Krems are presented without fanfare. The official from Vienna nods, says, accurately consistent. It is the highest praise you'll receive all year. But with it comes a new assignment, secondary verification. You are now part of a small team tasked with auditing the auditors, not the initial village collectors, but the middlemen, those who gather local data and transmit it to Vienna. Their power lies not in theft, but in interpretation. A poor village can seem moderate with creative ink. A nobleman's overgrown pasture can be marked as productive with the stroke of a pen. Your duty is to compare their ledgers with the original field books. The process is dry but telling. You find an entry where a yield of 320 sheaves of wheat has become 375 in the regional account. Elsewhere, a farm once exempt from payment due to widowhood is now listed as returned to productivity, despite no such event being recorded. The temptation, you realize, is not in theft, it is in rounding upward. A few sheaves here, a few gulden there, after all, who would notice? But the system does notice. That is what you are now, part of a self-watching mechanism. You send corrections to Vienna, each with attached references. See Kremsfeld-Buch 9, Folio 23, Original Yield. Contradiction between tax exemption request and population ledger. You begin to appreciate the subtle art of administrative suspicion. Not accusation, not enforcement, just recorded doubt. And when that doubt accumulates, when 5 or 6 villages show patterns of accidental increases, the central office issues what it calls a review of trustworthiness. The term is vague. The results are not. One day, an entire ledger office in Tulln is quietly closed. No charges, no public shame, just a note, replaced by direct reporting protocol. You meet the man who took over. He is younger than you. He brings his own ink pot, writes with a steel-nibbed pen. This one leaves no room for flourishes, he jokes. You wonder if that's the future of bureaucracy. Sharper pens, tighter rules, less discretion. And yet, discretion is what has allowed the system to function in so many places for so long. In June, you're sent to a particularly problematic district near Waidhofen. The village clerk, a weary man with coal dust on his cuffs, hands you 2 sets of ledgers, one official, one personal. The second one is more detailed. It includes deaths, illnesses, fires, failed seedings, all the reasons why the village came short. But they were left out of the official version, he says, so as not to attract shame. You note the discrepancy. You don't punish it, but you do record it. And by recording it, you force the state to see what is hidden in plain sight. This, you realize, is the true nature of your work. Not to punish, not to praise, but to translate lived reality into the language of the state. Later that summer, a new directive comes down from Vienna. The taxpayer identity sheets are to be updated and standardized. Every contributor to the fiscal census must now have a formalized entry: name, age, occupation, location, number of dependents, and a personal seal or mark. You are tasked with collecting many of these. At first, people are nervous. They ask if their names will be used to raise taxes, if it will affect conscription, if they'll lose their land. You reassure them. It is only a record, so you are not forgotten. One man, a stonemason, cannot write. He presses his thumb in soot and leaves a black mark. You place it in the book beside his name, carefully copied by your own hand. You wonder how many of these people have ever had their names written down before. What is it to be counted after a life of being invisible? By the end of the year, your tax log contains nearly 800 entries. Most are unremarkable, but each one represents a life now accounted for. A family entered into history not by war, not by rebellion, not by legend, but by ledger. You return to Krems and deliver your records. The chief collector nods, signs your report, and files it. No fanfare, just quiet progress. The next day, you're already preparing forms for the next round of reviews. You sharpen your quill, stack your blank registers, and rub wax into your seal. And you think, if I do my job well, no one will ever know I existed. But the empire will. It is 1778. Your boots are cracked. Your writing hand trembles after long days on the road. But your mind, sharpened by years of writing, recording, and reconciling, is focused. You have become, in the words of your regional supervisor, a pillar of compliance. That is to say, you are reliable, consistent, and absolutely forgettable. And yet, the empire turns on the backs of men like you. You know the system now, inside and out. You know which villages pre-fill their ledgers in anticipation of your arrival. You know which clerics exaggerate crop yields in drought years, hopping to impress the diocese. You know which noble families habitually file late, confident that no one will press them. You even know which road will flood in spring, delaying the delivery of St. Vate's tax chest. You don't stop any of it. You record it. Because that is your role, not judgment but observation. The idea is that truth, once entered, has its own weight. And yet something is shifting. The emperor now is Joseph II, son of Maria Theresa. He is younger, bolder. Where his mother built the machine of the state, Joseph wants to drive it faster, more taxes, more censuses, more state-owned land, and less tolerance for noble immunity. You begin to feel this in the memos. They come more frequently now, bearing the imperial cipher and urgent tones. All ecclesiastical holdings to be reassessed. Tax exemptions of aristocratic estates under review. All land records to be cross-verified with cadastral maps. You are tasked with a new duty, rechecking the ownership of church lands. This is delicate work. You walk through convent gardens, parish storehouses, and cemeteries, comparing what is used with what is declared. A nun in Melk hands you a record showing vineyard acreage. You can see with your own eyes that the vineyards now stretch beyond those figures. She blushes, says nothing. You write in your log. Apparent discrepancy in extent of vineyard production. Additional harvests not reported in ledger. You don't accuse, you don't sanction, but the note once delivered to Vienna triggers a revaluation. The tax rises. Soon after, an imperial edict comes down. Monastic holdings may be subject to secular redistribution. Joseph II wants to reduce the church's role in rural economics. You see the effects ripple out. One priest who for years had overseen 3 small hamlets' taxes is removed, replaced by a lay clerk. The transition is awkward. No one trusts the newcomer. Children no longer run to hand in tax forms with flowers tucked in them. Now they watch from doorways. You note that too. Later in the year, you return to a familiar village weinbock where you've been recording grape yields for 7 years. The same vintner greets you. He laughs when he sees your satchel. The man who never forgets the shape of a hillside. He hands you the new figures. They are slightly lower than last year. You glance at the vines heavy with fruit. You know they're low. He knows you know. But you also know that Joseph's reforms have taxed them harder this year. You don't question the discrepancy. You write what you're given. You note lower yield claimed, possible underreporting for relief. Then you sign it, seal it, and move on. Because this is the burden of the modern bureaucracy. It sees more but can enforce less without breaking the trust that holds it together. You reflect now on the entire system. Thousands of men like you, spread across the empire, riding through dust and snow to enter figures no one may ever read, but that collectively shape the state's understanding of its own existence. Each tax form becomes part of a meta-consciousness, a memory of wheat fields and goats, children and barrels, deaths and floods. The empire is not a palace in Vienna. It is a library of ledgers. And yet, you also feel something fragile beneath it all. Because numbers do not equal compliance. Compliance is a culture, and cultures can fade. Joseph II continues to push reforms, faster reporting, stricter accounting, more rational layouts. You receive your first pre-printed ledger with blank lines already ruled and labeled. It's cleaner, easier to read. But the priest in Zwettl refuses to use it. Too mechanical, he says. It doesn't reflect the rhythm of our life. And maybe he's right. The danger, you suspect, is that the state becomes so in love with its forms that it forgets the people who fill them. You begin to see villages submitting perfect ledgers, no errors, no variation, no commentary. You know it can't be true. You know people don't live like that. So you wonder, what happens when the empire's map becomes more real than its terrain? Your last assignment is in Spitz, a sleepy town along the Danube. You walk the vineyard slopes one final time. You meet with the registrar. You sign the annual report. You press your seal. You do not speak much. He thanks you. You nod. And then you leave. You retire that winter. You do not keep your records. They belong to the state. Your name is entered into one final ledger, clerk dismissed by natural cause A. And that is it. No statue, no anthem, no portrait. But someone, decades from now, may wonder why grain taxes rose slightly in Lower Austria during the 1770s. They'll find your handwriting, faded and crisp, still legible. They won't know your face, but they'll read your record. And for a moment, just a line, just a figure, you'll exist again.